Hello, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome you today again to my financial education seminar. This is a second in a series, and we will have a total of 4 workshops. Last week we did have the beginning. This is the second, followed by next week will be the third, and then the fourth. So again, it's my pleasure to welcome you all tonight. As you can see, the topic of our presentation is transforming our financial behaviors during a pandemic. And it's a very important topic today. I will be following a presentation and a structure while glancing at my notes, just giving you a heads up so we can go to the next slide. I do want to take a moment to talk about Zoom and how Zoom functions, as well as accessibility. So again, this is a webinar style presentation. So it is best viewed on a computer or a laptop with a full monitor. Again, if you're using an iPad or a mobile device, it might not be the best access for you. So I do recommend using a computer. Again, we want to make sure that you are listening to the interpreters. We have voice interpreters available tonight. So go ahead and click the voice button so that you can listen to the interpreters. Additionally, we also have closed captioning available, and these can be set again with a button. You can click and have live captions. Again, if you are experiencing any technical difficulties, you can't see the captions, please do go ahead and request support through the chat. You can share your concerns there on Zoom. And that's a little bit of the house rules here. Now, again, I want to explain how to use Zoom. So there have been some recent updates to Zoom. So we want to make sure that you have the most recent edition of Zoom, and that link is available for you there. Again, we also want to remind you of how to use and modulate your screen so that it fits the size that's appropriate for your viewing pleasure. You will see 2 white lines in the middle of the screen that you can drag and drop to resize. And again, it's all up to your comfort. So we're all clear on how to use Zoom? Great, we can go to the next slide. Now, again, we do want to invite the audience to interact with us. That's very important to us. There are a few ways. You can go ahead and ask questions through the Q&A box, which is at the bottom. You can go ahead and type your questions there, and one of the members of our team will take care of giving me this information so that I can provide an answer. And I will be toggling back and forth between both the questions and the answers. Also, if you have comments or, like I said before, technical issues, we do have the chat box available for you to use. Additionally, we do encourage you to upvote questions in case you have the same question as someone else. This will make sure that they're prioritized and included. You can include questions, comments, issues. Again, we can vote, and we just want to have a lively discussion channel through our chat box. Next slide, please. Again, it's of vital importance to say thank you to CST Learns, who is hosting this specific webinar on financial education and literacy. Again, this event, the seminar, has been sponsored by the funding of the Wells Fargo Foundation. They have been offering their support, and they also understand how important of a topic this is. So thank you to Wells Fargo Foundation. Now we'll begin with introductions. Again, this topic is vital, and especially during the result of a pandemic, we have been really impacted internationally, and the impact is felt today and furthermore. Before I proceed with this presentation, I do want to do a little bit of a review, and I'll start by introducing myself. My name is Alex Jones, and I am the founder of ASL Coach Strategy Partners. and that's my DBA. You can see the link there. We're based here in Rochester, New York, and the purpose of our organization is to focus on financial support coaching. Now, what this means is that for those individuals who are interested in learning more about their financial behavior, perhaps starting making more financial decisions that are sound and creating savings, we would love to work with them to develop goals in order to reduce their personal debt and also increase their savings. And so we work with individuals, and you can contact me on Facebook. Additionally, I will have my contact information available too. It's alexjones848@gmail.com. Please feel free to contact me if you have any follow-up questions or any curiosities. I'd be happy to work with you and provide services. Additionally, I do want to clarify that I am a financial coach. Now, what this means is that I do not provide advice for investments necessarily, or life insurance, tax preparations, none of that. That's actually the role of a certified financial planner, known as a CFP. Now, there is also a CPA, which is a certified public accountant, and they actually focus on developing strategies in financial planning. They do have a license and a certification. Now, my role specifically in providing and is specifically in working with individuals to learn how to save more and adjusting their behaviors and financial decision making. That's who I am. Now, again, as I mentioned before, the topic that we introduced last week was on behavioral economics. This took place on January 13th. Now, this week's topic, we will be diving deeper into behavioral economics, specifically discussing content and terminology, specifically how your brain makes decisions and how they impact our finances, right? So we want to engage more with the cognitive portion and discuss our biases that we hold before making financial decisions. And we will be expanding on these topics as well. That's the topic for tonight. Now, next week, we will be diving deeper into how behavioral economics is applied to our personal finances. And I think this is a really interesting topic because there is a difference between behavioral economics and our personal financial decisions, right? And they both converge at some point. Last week, we discussed the relationship that we have with money. And I specifically used the story of A Christmas Carol, right? I thought of myself as, Ebenezer Scrooge. I would hoard my money, my finances, and I wasn't willing to share them as much. I just wanted to keep them all. So that's a specific relationship with money. And I use that as an example. Now, the concept of behavioral economics focuses on how our brain makes decisions, how our mind, how we use our cognitive capacity, and how our biases influencing our buying power. For example, they influence our decisions of people compulsively using credit cards or maybe developing a dream of wanting to own a house. So tonight we will be discussing this further. And of course, you do not want to miss the upcoming workshops. It's a really exciting opportunity for you to learn more. So I invite you all to come. Next slide, please. Tonight's workshop, we will be discussing 3 distinct topics. And you can take a look at the slide here to see what we will be talking about. We will be examining and analyzing our concept and our understanding of behavioral economics, and also the different tools available to us, specifically that influence our biases when it comes to purchases and buying, and also the future decisions that you will make as it pertains to our biases and economics and how they do impact them. You will also learn to apply some of these concepts that we will be discussing to your own lives. So from 2008 to this moment, I did share an example during our last session, and you will see more about it in the upcoming sessions. Tonight I will be sharing a little bit about the research that I've been developing. And finally, you will be able to translate some of the concepts of this session into more informed and thoughtful choices on your money decision-making process. For example, you will be gaining new vocabulary that will influence your decision-making process and how you can apply them and using them now while avoiding the dangers of feeling overconfident with your finances or having uncertainties about it. Again, our goal is to lower your uncertainties and to also develop a professional understanding from a professional. So we will be learning a little bit more about our goals. So let's get started.
All right, so now we're going to start a discussion about behavioral economics. So we're not thinking, awesome, we're not rational as economists want us to believe. So, when you look at that picture, when you're trying to think about like just straight data, when you're thinking about statistics or something like that. And so economists use that to measure us. And so when you think about from the perspective of Mr. Spock from Star Trek, who was very analytical the whole time. And so you think about, when you think about supply and demand and goods and purchases, and we think about how that functions within the market, they really don't include psychologists or social scientists. Economists know the numbers. Psychologists or social scientists or sociologists, they know humans. And so humans are different from the economy. And so when you think about econ, you think about making the right decision, and then you look at psychologists, and you look at from the perspective of psychologists, we have our own biases, our own preferences, our own emotions, and those fluctuate and our moods change over time. And that's our human nature. And economists don't view it that way. And so it's really important to remember throughout this that we, at the end of the day, we are human. So when you see this slide right here, on the right, you see the right brain and it's all colorful. And then you see the left brain is straight numbers. So when we looked at fusion economics, so we look at how social science and psychology and economics all work together. You combine those to get a full understanding of the human decision-making process and how those different sides interact with each other. So when you look at my experience through research and the projects like that, we realize that we all come to the table with really heavy biases. And we have to remember that we're humans. We have feelings, we have emotions, we have tempers, we have moods, we have sadness. All of those emotions are involved. And so when we look at the economy, we have to figure out how those work together and how those things intertwine to make our decisions. And those things in the end impact the fluctuations of the market. And you look at the stock markets, when it starts to go down, people say they want to sell all their stocks. And when the economy is booming, people want to buy away. And so economists have tried to figure out what that looks like. And they've looked at psychologists and social scientists to help that. And they realize when people have a high level of concern, they start to sell. And they've started to figure out how they can take behavioral economics and that develop behavioral economics and how those different things play together. And that's what we're going to discuss today. So now we're going to discuss cognitive biases. So when we think about cognitive biases, it's all play. We're talking about the decision-making process, and it's both impacted by what we know and what we don't know. So when we think about error, when we talk about errors, we're not talking specifically about doing something wrong so much as we're talking about something within the decision-making process itself. It's something that doesn't best support us financially. It's like, for instance, when we pick a partner, when we get married, or when we buy a house, or when we apply for a job, or go through the interviewing process, and then we decide, okay, I'm going to accept that offer. But then when we go in, we realize it's not exactly what I expected. That is related to a cognitive bias that we went into the process with. So now we're going to start off with this concept. When you take a look at this slide. So when I'm talking about the pain of pain, this is one of my favorite, because you see number one and the person is just really upset. Maybe this is related to paying bills, and when you're paying cash, maybe you see your monthly bills, and if you pay with cash, and then you go through to a debit card, you know that they're taking money from the bank account, so you're still a little bit upset. But then with a credit card, you're like, oh, I'll pay for it later. This is no big deal. And you just swipe away, no problem at all. But then later, it comes back to number one when we get the bill. And then we have to pay, and you realize, oh, I don't have enough money. So that's called double entry. And it's a little bit ironic because it's the same. Credit, debit, cash, it's all the same. But we don't realize that at the moment because our biases take over. Again, it's going back to credit. Debit card, we're a little bit more apprehensive. Credit, we swipe away, but then later it circles back to when it's due. And that's when it hits us. And so that's call it the pain of double entry. And you start to feel worse when it comes down to pay it at the end. You know, again, with the debit, you're like, okay. But when you're paying something regularly with a credit card, you're like, all right, I got this. And it's important that we recognize that, you know, it's odd how we make these decisions, and that we really need to face the reality when the bill's going to come at the end of the day. So one perfect example, when you think about an all-inclusive package for a cruise, it includes food, drinks, all the extra excursions, all of that is included. You prepay and you're good to go. You know, yeah, you've paid, you know, maybe there's some things along the line. But then when you get there, you realize, you know, you're going through the buffet, or, you know, so you think about like Carnival cruise ship or something like that. You're thinking, oh, this is free because you've already prepaid going in. So if you think about another cruise experience that's not all inclusive, you arrive, you paid for the cruise, and then you start to pay along the way. Every drink you have to pay for, every meal you have to pay for. And whew, that's the pain of pain, because you start to realize every individual transaction. So here's another interesting bias. So this one's called a brain hack. You're trying to figure out how to convince yourself to buy, so that you're trying to change behavior. And that's what you see here depicted in this picture. So you see the fruit there at the end of the counter. And then you see the donuts in the background. So you see the fruit, and you're thinking, oh, yeah, I think you're trying to encourage the person to get the fruit. You want to buy something healthy, something along those lines. So when you can apply that to a store. When you enter in, you may see some produce right in front, right? huge, like the size, like maybe like you see the products in front, like a 50-inch TV or an iPhone or all the different really high priced products right at the beginning, working as instant advertisement, trying to nudge you. And it's really trying to alter your habits. Or if you go into your average grocery store, you may see fruit or something right in front as soon as you walk in. You enter and you see the fruit shining fresh right in front of you. And you think, oh, yeah, I think I want to eat healthy. It's the new year, maybe lose some weight, or I want to improve my health. So, yeah, I'm going to get fruit, and you load up your cart. But really, it's being framed to encourage you to buy that fruit. But really, you have a shopping list that you went in with already. But now you're starting to deviate from that shopping list and just fill up your cart. And that's what they expect. So, growing up, I really subscribed to this bias. And I figured, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So it came to a job or a car or, different things. I thought I had a really clear understanding of what is right is wrong. And that, my opinion, that was what I saw. Someone else's opinion, I didn't really take into consideration. And if someone didn't agree with me, I thought, fine, I would just research a way to support my own decisions. And I would say, look, see, I'm right. Here's the proof. And that's an example of a confirmation bias, where you find data that supports your own ideas, your own decisions, but without really analyzing alternate views from your own and looking at other perspectives. And so the dangers of that is that you continue to do the same thing. And of course, that's going to produce the same results. There's no deviation from that. There's no new ideas. So it's really important that you be aware of the confirmation bias. Next slide, please. So you see this slide right here. It says, we do not have the energy to analyze things. And you see the picture of the slide, how it's going through the different processes. So this is talking about the opportunity cost. And this is really interesting because we're talking when we think about buying a new car compared to a used car. We're trying to figure out, what kind of car we want to keep for 10 or 15 years down the line. And we're trying to figure out, should I stay or should I move? Should I order takeout or should I cook at home? Should I go to a restaurant? You're thinking, oh, I worked all day, I'm tired. So I text my family and say, I'm going to buy some McDonald's and I'm just going to bring the food home. Because you're overcooking, you're tired of it. All day. So from the moment I got up in the morning, I've had to make decisions. What am I going to wear to work? I had to shower, brush my teeth. What shoes am I going to wear now? That's another decision that I've made. And I've made all these micro decisions throughout the day. And so I've made, with 80,000 decisions within a day. And so by the end of the day, when it hits 5 p.m., when I have to now think about what I want to cook, or just go get some quick takeout or get something from a restaurant, my brain is exhausted. So the opportunity cost anything that requires our analysis, that requires us to really think about making a decision, either this or that. Should I continue with that? That takes up a lot of time and commitment. And many folks are not willing to analyze their decisions to that degree. And that tool is very important to our decision-making process. Should I sign up for online dating? Or should I hope that I'm going to meet somewhere out, maybe through friends or That's again another type of analysis. I'm looking at the data, looking at the person's history, all those things. There's just so much information around in our brains, and we're constantly analyzing to make a decision. And so we get so tired at the end of the day. And so that's when we're talking about the opportunity costs. And so what comes next is decision fatigue. And you can look at the 3 steps of the decision fatigue. So the first one is related to the opportunity cost. What should I give up now to have other opportunities? Or what should I do now to have a benefit down the line? Number 2 refers to decision avoidance. We think about a good rule of thumb is that if it's a predictable decision that's the same every week, something that we do through our routine or we do every day, or every weekend we do the same thing when there's no deviation from that, nothing new. That's how we avoid making decisions. And then 3 is just impulse purchasing. You're not thinking, you're just buying away, swiping away, charging away, maybe, just going to a monthly bill or a personal loan or trading it up for a more expensive car. But you're really following those wants without any thinking. And that starts to impact our finances severely. And number 4 is talking about self-regulation. And when we lose that ability to self-regulate, if you think about identify as a strong person, but maybe losing control or self-regulation means that you're not thinking, more impulse buying, maybe you're more susceptible to that mind hacking. Maybe it's easier to be nudged in one direction or another. And we start to lose control of our own personal finances. And when we start to lose control of our financial life, it has quite the impact. And remember when the economy stopped, when unemployment skyrocketed, when folks were losing their jobs, that's a really tough time to lose control of yourself and to lose that self-regulation. And so we need to figure out how to reduce that decision-making fatigue. And that will help us make better decisions down the line.
Now, this is actually one of my favorite vocabulary words, self-hurting. I actually am a big fan of Starbucks. It's, I'm a little bit addicted to the hot chocolate. It's my favorite and my go-to drink. And well, before the pandemic, I would go to Starbucks about 3 times a week. I just loved ordering, and I would sit there for hours on end, reading books, reviewing, business meetings and plans, meeting with a team member there, taking them out to a hot chocolate. And I'm not actually a big fan of Dunkin' Donuts. I don't really like their hot chocolate. So, I thought that Starbucks was, regardless of the price difference, where Dunkin' Donuts was cheaper, and there really wasn't that big of a difference in taste between Starbucks and Dunkin' Donuts. The difference there was that I could sit down in a comfortable area with a desk, set out my different equipment for work. The lighting was just right. And so I felt very comfortable having coaching sessions there. And actually, the Starbucks that I went to a lot, there was someone there who was fluent in sign language. So those were the kinds of things that nudged me into going in that direction. And there you might think that the price difference isn't too big between $4 at Starbucks and $2 at Dunkin' Donuts, but the comfort levels and the joy that I got from going to Starbucks and having my favorite drink was what influenced that. Okay, so now is our opportunity for the audience to answer a question based on what you have learned last week and up to this point. We are going to go ahead and start a poll. So if you can please pop open that poll, please. And you can go ahead and take a moment to answer this question. What is financial coaching? So we can go ahead and show the results once you are ready. Let's look at the results to the poll. I see. I'm just reviewing everyone's answers right now. Okay, great. I do want to take a moment to explain kind of what the difference is here. So the answer is the fourth choice, to provide structure, accountability, and support. So most of you actually chose the right answer. You said that a financial coach provides structure, accountability, and support. That is correct. Great response. Now, structure, support, and accountability is an ongoing process, and it's a way to develop and stability in your economic life and livelihood. You do this for yourself. Next slide. Oh, this is actually the answer slide, so let's go to the next one. Great. So if we can please display the poll again. Okay, you've all had the time to take the poll. Let's look at the results. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm laughing at some of your comments. Let's go to the next slide. Yes, so this is the one here. This is the correct answer. So a certified financial planner gives advice on investments. A CFP. So they work with clients specifically towards achieving certain objectives when it comes to finances, retirements, and the like. They give advice on how to make investments, and they differ from coaches for that specific reason. So this is great. You've learned something. Let's go to the next slide. Now, again, this is another concept from behavioral economics. It's herding. And this is actually very popular on Facebook and Instagram and social media. People share on their stories, they will post pictures. Or perhaps individuals will go to popular restaurants while traveling, they'll go out to specific dances, and there are apps that uh, are specifically used to document and amass all of these different kinds of trends, right? So they influence our buying power, and a lot of people take to these trends. And this really demonstrates how our biases are in play when we make decisions. These all are devoid of analysis and processing, and oftentimes we just blindly follow these trends. Again, this is a big influence on our finances.
Following the crowd.
We often get caught in the trap and follow it. And people tend to follow crowds because they feel like everyone else is doing it and using it. It's something that you see often. Now, oftentimes people will hoard to a specific restaurant. Maybe they will buy the same type of device, for example, a car or a computer. And when you see someone else who has these objects, who possesses them, then you feel influenced, nudged, so to speak, to make the same decision. And oftentimes we don't think about our family, our future, or how it will impact others. We simply think of ourselves and that instant gratification. So again, this is another example of bias through hurting. Next slide, please. Yes. I am actually guilty of being one of these people. I love polos and I love going shopping and I love going to stores and I have hordes and hordes of clothing and I'm always really attracted to sales because I feel like I'm really saving a lot, right? If you look at a price and you see it $80 originally, but then you see it again for $20 and you realize that's a huge reduction. Of course, it's a steal. I'll go ahead and buy it. I'm saving $60. And now I would spend a lot of times, going through the different racks and comparing prices. And you could imagine the decision making that I was taking and the process that I was going under, looking and scouring the different racks to make sure that I bought the best price for me so that I can save 80 to 90%. And it really price comparing, it really demonstrates how we spend a lot of time specifically looking for the best deal. But really, the best deal isn't always the decision that we're making. Clothes can already be cheap. There are different options that are already reduced in price for $20 or something like that. And maybe each item costs $20. So we recognize that the factory is sending this type of clothing in hordes, and they are, offering all these price reductions and sales. So it looks really attractive to us. So it actually makes us work harder to make that decision of buying something that's 40 to 50% off. But really, the decision has already been made for us by the company, by the factory. And we may already have experienced some decision fatigue, like the example I mentioned before, of working all day and not wanting to cook, right? So by that point, we're burnt out, we're exhausted. So the decision is made for us, it's easy. Now, this is actually a really interesting concept. It's mental accounting. And this is actually a concept research by Richard Thaler. And he figured out specifically how individuals budget and how we account for different expenses in our lives. For example, rent. We allocate funds for a credit card. How we save money for retirement or the likes. And there's a couple of different categories. From an economist's point of view, this is actually breaking a fungible rule. It's a violation of this rule. When really, there's no difference between the amount of money that we're saving or spending. We're still spending it, we're still using it, we're still saving it. So now when we divide money, we think of how perhaps someone else is assigning a budget to us. For example, at work, we have to request funds for a specific use, right? So again, a budget is assigned, an amount is already decided for you. Perhaps it's like $20,000, and it's your responsibility to decide how these funds will be allocated and to divide them into different forms. For example, in my department, there's money allocated for student development, for staff and professional development, as well as equipment. There's a budget for that. And all of this money comes from the college. It's the business aspect of it, right? It's about setting up a budget that most of us don't really think about. And then we realize that this money is assigned for us. We always think of, well, my department has this amount of money allocated, and we don't think of how it's divided up. So again, when we think of what money is and how it's spent and allocated, whether regardless of the amount, that's again an example of violating a fungible rule. Because we don't have self-control over the spending, we don't actually know how much is being spent. We just know the amount of money we have. So this is a way to help manage and set a budget to allocate it appropriately. And next week, I'll be going deeper into what this means. Next slide, please. I recognize that my time is running out, so I'm going to be rushing through these next one. I know that we're close to the end of the session, and I also want to share some resources that you can take a look at and read, as well as a TED Talk that will help you understand specifically this concept here, the sunk cost fallacy. This is actually a big risk. It's dangerous, precarity. And we often think of value, specifically when it applies to a house. We spend all this time on improvements and really making sure that we're furnishing it correctly so that it can be sold. So that when an individual goes in, they see how well it's staged, they can equate the value to what they are seeing. For example, a house or something that costs 70K or 190K, that's the value that is actually appraised at. We often think of all the work that was invested and everything that was done to improve the look of the house, and people don't often look at that. They may not want to accept the offer, but not accepting an offer is actually an opportunity for someone else to do it. So again, when we think of the sunk cost fallacy, we often think of something cheap that we can invest towards in hopes that it would raise the value and the cost of it. So now again, I'm not giving investment advice. I'm just giving examples here. But in terms of going and investing on a house that has lower value, our goal is to invest more so that we can be okay and we can legitimize and rationalize accepting a loss because we feel that it's ultimately going to improve it. So that way we can save ourselves from that disappointment or that loss from experiencing a depreciation in value. Now, I will explain more about this concept a little bit more.
So this is a perfect example. Netflix is a perfect example of this. When they say, oh, you get 7 days free, you can watch any show you want, just watch away 7 days and you watch. And then at the end of the 7 days, when that trial expires, you decide, I'm going to keep it. I'm done. Because it's already become yours. Or if you think about a car, you take a car for a test drive, you go off, and they say, no, go by yourself. And you realize they're not going to come with you. And they want you to go off and drive the car. And you're like, wow, I get to go by myself. You know, back in the day, you used to have someone in the back seat watching you. Now they just let you drive away on your own. And so you feel more comfortable. You feel more attached to the car. And then you park and you feel like, I want that car. And you're all of a sudden willing to pay with it. That's the idea. That's the representation of the endowment effect. House is a similar concept. You know, I remember, looking back to my house, my family home, and that you don't want to accept an offer for a lower price. You want to keep it because it's mine, and you expect the equity to go up. And that idea will impact your finances. So we look at loss aversion. It means that you're unwilling to accept a loss. And you think that, no, this is going to turn around. Maybe you're like, oh, if the company tries new ideas or new products, and I can just keep investing away and it'll eventually come through. And you're steady. You're quite stubborn in that. And you keep putting money into it. But in the end, you're just gaining more and more loss. And that has a huge impact on your life. All right, so now it's time for the wrap up. So today we learned the concept of how we see social science, psychology, and economics, how all three of those research areas went into understanding our decision-making process and how those decision-making process impact our own personal finances. So back when the 80s and 90s, it became really, really, people started studying more and more. And by the time we got to the early 2000s, we kind of experienced a boom in people researching behavior economics and people looking into our everyday decision-making process. And so when we talk about insights, that's a new concept within behavioral economics. And today you've gotten some new vocabulary and things that you can look in, and things that we've looked in deeper and expanded more on these concepts. So right here, I'm going to suggest my favorite book, which is Dollars and Cents: How We Misthink Money and How to Spend Smarter. That is an excellent book, and I strongly recommend that book to you all. That has a ton of vocabulary within itself. And then here's a TED Talk about why we make bad decisions. And so the concepts discussed in that are really cool. So these are two resources that I suggest to help your continuing understanding of behavioral economics. And now we're to the Q&A session. So I'm going to look and read the questions in the chat and then, or the questions in the Q&A, and then I'll answer them. So I have a question about, can you talk more about the cost of going to college versus learning on the job? So that depends on your own individual visions or goals. It depends on what you want to become, what your interests are, what your professional development looks like when we're thinking about right now, but also our future goals. You talked about working in technology, becoming a teacher, maybe if you need a college degree, or maybe some fields don't require a college degree. If the job offers continuing education or development, or professional development to get more skills, continue learning, so you can use those skills to move up the ladder. And some jobs don't. So it really depends on your individual choices and your overall dreams and what you see for yourself in your future. So that's really going to be dependent on your individual situation. And as you know, college today is very expensive. So if your job offers college tuition benefits, and that's something you should really take advantage of. If not, it's something to think about. You know, there's various different loans and other types of funding. So there's an interesting word. What is this sign for impaired self-regulation? So I was looking at, so we're doing the sign right here where you say lose self-control or no self-control. You can see that's what I'm signing right here. That's the sign I'm using for that term. So that term impaired has a very strong connotation. So I'm looking at the emphasis on self-control versus no self-control, but there's no official established sign for it. That's what I'm using. So when do financial obligations start, such as money investments? Are these kids-friendly YouTube videos available on this topic? Okay, all right. I think that's something that we need to explore more. When do financial obligations start, as such as money investments? So if I understand the question correctly, you mean like in the 80s when should you start saving money? Or if you should start from the age of 18 saving money, or how do I know it's like a 529 or something like that? Is it, that's, or tax deductions along those lines. The 529 is a type of savings plan that starts before the baby is born or before you adopt children or whatever the situation is. That's something where you can start putting money away. That's a savings plan that you do throughout the life of the child. Many people use that. So if you're talking about a situation where you don't have any children, for example, last year we had a teaching children, excuse me. For example, where the children are watching the parents talk about money, and they're watching, and the parents start modeling appropriate behavior. When you're looking at kids starting from age 1 to 2, or even really as young as 6 months to 8 months, they can really start to feel any type of stress coming from the parents. And so it's a good idea to set a good example from the very beginning. Again, going back to using a college savings plan, such as a 529, and putting that money away from college, that's a good start. You can talk to a CPA or CFP, again, a certified financial planner, and they can really help you develop a strategy to figure out what's best for your situation and what are the options best for your state. All right, so looking at question number 4. So how do I increase self-regulation to reduce impulse buying? That's something that we're going to discuss next week. All right, so please come. I'll give you a quick taste of it. So one idea is to automate everything. That way, you're not making personal decisions. But please come next week for a more in-depth discussion about that. We'll get into it. I'm going to stick to this book. This is a good one here. It's easy to read. It has pictures and images. Yep, this book is the way to go. It has a lot of stories, a lot of examples, constantly going over different ways to apply the concepts, expanding on those, talking about the pain of double payment and business behavioral economics, all these different topics that I've discussed today. You can see great examples within that book. I have 10 different books related to economics, behavior economics specifically, but this one is the best by far. And also that TED Talk about behavioral economics. And that will help you really understand the concepts more. And that talks about how decision-making impacts your cognitive process and biases. Someone asked me, what is the fungible rule? So when we look at it from an economic perspective, every dollar you have, maybe it's $1 or $10 or $30, they all have equal value. But the way that our mind thinks they're different. We think $20 is different from $50, different from $30. We put them in different categories. Or our mental accounting. You know, we say that goes to the mortgage. That goes to my car payment. That goes to an college education fund for kids, for our children. But it's all one accounting. That's taking care of one thing. Plus we have in the investment landscape that we're taking into consideration. Maybe we have 5 or 10 different accounts for different purposes. Maybe we have an emergency fund, an account for paying bills, a savings account, account for future college education, a travel account for emergency funds if something breaks, if our car breaks down, and then an account just for having fun. But that rule says that everything has equal value. All of those funds have equal value. So maybe you can research a little bit more, and the more you learn about that concept, it'll better help us with our own financial habits. Next slide. All right, we're done with the Q&A. Let's go to the next slide, please. All right, so next week we're going to go more in depth about behavioral economics and how it applies to our personal finances. It's a really exciting opportunity, so please come next week. We're starting at 7 to discuss our money and how it affects our decision-making process. And please invite your friends to join us for this discussion. And our goal is to continue offering this discussion to our communities. We really want to keep this going through our communities and let it reverberate. All right, and then we're going to put out the survey. And please fill it out. We really want your feedback. We want you involved in this process. All right, so that's how we're going to get that going with this survey here. Next slide, please. Next slide. Oh, okay. Before we wrap up, I want to emphasize something very important and give a big thank you to Wells Fargo Foundation for supporting and funding this kind of education and this workshop. Thank you so much to the Wells Fargo Foundation. You guys have a wonderful week, have a wonderful rest of your week, a wonderful weekend, and we will see